Hello, my name is Celia Bland, and I'm delighted to be part of the Barbara Pym Society Conference, March 2021. I wish we were all together, but I appreciate this alternative. I'm going to share my screen very briefly, just so you can see the title of my paper. It's called An Unsuitable Equivalence, Commonalities of Style and Theme in Barbara Pym's An Unsuitable Attachment, and Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye. When Barbara Pym appeared on Desert Island Discs on the 29th of July, 1978, the announcer asked how she would find shelter while shipwrecked on that desert island. Imagine Pym's refined accents as she replies, "I suppose I will contrive something with leaves and branches." Listeners will note the humorous clarity of expression so familiar to Pym's readers. One is tempted to scan the phrase, "contrive something with leaves and branches." It could serve as an introduction to my talk. To contrive a connection between Barbara Pym's bittersweet comedies and Raymond Chandler's hard-boiled mysteries may seem unwise to the point of foolishness. Pym was, in the words of Shirley Hazard, the poet of the lonely, the virtuous, the ironic, of the unostentatiously intelligent and witty, of the angelically self-effacing. Chandler, meanwhile, according to Frank McShane, his biographer, wrote in a language that combined the strength of the classical English with the vitality of American vernacular speech, the romantic and the realistic. This paper will trace the Venn diagram of these authors' shared qualities. One could say that they are similarly consumed by considerations of character. How will someone respond when confronted, say, with an unexpected proposal from a man who wears African masks around his house? How will they face such moral quandaries as an anonymous gift of Victoriana or a request for help from a writer afraid that he will kill his wife in a drunken rage? This paper will compare Pym's An Unsuitable Attachment to Chandler's sixth and last novel, The Long Goodbye. Both novels, written under the influence of a rapidly changing society, attempt to move beyond their respective formulas. The novel's female protagonists, Pym's Ianthe Broome and Chandler's Eileen Wade, are women pressed into traditionally passive feminine roles who, in the course of the narratives, discover newfound, even transgressive freedoms. For Pym, as for Chandler, the equilibrium of their fast-moving and witty prose is jarred by a deep unease with newfound reconceptions of faith, community, and family. These novels, I will show, exhibit a disconcerted response to modernity, a breaking out, even as they acquiesce to the popular genres of ladies' novels and pulp fiction, to which they were consigned by publishers and reviewers. And just as an aside, I'd like to share show you just a little bit of the differences between the way they were popularly advertised, i.e. through their covers. You can see the little priests on their motorbikes, their scooters, the flowers that connote a Barbara Pym novel, and the wild, dangerous women and agonized or passed out men of the Raymond Chandler novel. Both authors are known for a wry humor rooted in observed behavior, a keen eye for the ridiculous, the corrupt, the hypocritical. For instance, Pym at her amusingly cruel best is at her amusingly cruel best in An Unsuitable Attachment when she introduces the Fairfaxes. "Oh, here are the Fairfaxes," Rupert declared as the door opened to admit a tall, middle-aged man and an even taller woman, obviously husband and wife. who had grown to look like each other in a rather unfortunate way, their small heads and long, stringy bodies seeming as if they must have combined the worst features of each. Yes, here we are. Rubina Fairfax's mouth opened in a smile which revealed teeth that could only have been her own, so variously colored and oddly shaped were they. And here's Chandler. He is known for his sarcastic similes. These are from The Long Goodbye. She had eyes that could count the money in your hip wallet. He had a face like a collapsed lung. I was as hollow and empty as the spaces between the stars. And this describing Dr. Veringer, a suspect whose eyes waved gently like the antenna of some suspicious insect. He looked sad, and the eyebrows drooped at the outer corners to match his mouth. Give them a little more growth, and they would be in his mouth. Literary critic James Woods situates the primary importance of literature as a vehicle for helping us readers see, evaluate, and understand. What Woods calls serious noticing are moments so particularly rendered as to become universal. Both these writers observed ordinary people, elevator operators, taxi drivers, waitresses, and church ladies are granted a masterful attention. Shirley Hazard said of Pym, "Nothing escapes such persons, and they escape nothing." The ordinariness that Pym celebrated irritated critics. Nothing happens, one complained. A review of Less Than Angels in the Times Literary Supplement in 1955 praises her work as amusing, despite the limitations of a small canvas and a neat, feminine talent. Neither was Chandler celebrated. The Washington Post described his plots as rambling at best and incoherent at worst. The London Review of Books had this to say: "We follow the detective on a series of clues, only to find out in the end that the book wasn't really about solving mysteries at all, but about the resolution of a search for a missing person whose fate, apparently determined at the outset, turns out to be radically otherwise. He who was thought to be alive turns out to have been long since dead. He was thought to be dead turns out to be alive. She who was thought to be one person turns out to be another." Indeed, Chandler's taste in endings is distinctly idiosyncratic for a mystery novelist. There are no open and shut cases, no Agatha Christie-style denouement, all suspects in one room to observe the bravura performance by the detective. Instead, Marlowe discovers truths the police reject as too complicated, too inconvenient to those in power. It is almost as if he is solving crimes to and for his own satisfaction. By the end of the novel, romantic ideals have been tested, loyalty proven, and cynicism buttressed. All of which could define the modus operandi of Barbara Pym's heroines in An Unsuitable Attachment. Their ideals, their maidenly fears, are tested, and their cynicism and romanticism, after an ethical struggle, ameliorated by experience. Pym and Chandler describe domestic routines, the making of tea, the making of coffee, as near religious rituals. They celebrate the openings of jumble sales and the opening of bars, when the air inside is still cool and clean and everything is shiny, and the barkeep is giving himself that last look in the mirror to see if his tie is straight and his hair is smooth. James Fenton in the London Times thought Pym obsessed with surfaces, with fabrics and foibles. And it was Chandler, in the assessment of the London Review, who possessed a fantastical power to name the things of the world, an astonishing vocabulary of plants, fashion, and interior design. In one short passage, he identifies juniper logs in the fireplace, walnut in the wainscoting, and a dozen kinds of hardwood in the parquetry. Chandler's private detective, Philip Marlowe, with an E, was named after the gentlemanly poet Sir Philip Sidney and the playwright Christopher Marlowe, who was killed in a tavern brawl. Gumshoe Marlowe is as nearly fond of quotations as a Pym heroine, dropping allusions to Shakespeare, Pepys, Flaubert, Eliot, and Hemingway, while navigating the hard-hearted streets of LA. Older than Pym by 25 years, Chandler shares with Pym some interesting biographical commonalities. He was the child of divorce. His father abandoned his Anglo-Irish mother in the Midwest, and she returned with young Raymond to live with the family in London. Chandler was educated at Dulwich College, where P.G. Wodehouse was a recent grad. He was gifted in the classics, but rejected university to live in France and Germany and write. He returned to London, worked as a freelancer for the newspapers and magazines, writing puff pieces, romantic poems, and reviews. In 1912, he returned to the US. I had to learn American just like a foreign language, he told a friend. Like Pym, who served in the Wrens, Chandler had wartime service. He enlisted in the Canadian Grenadiers in World War I and saw most of his regiment slaughtered in France. After a bout of the Spanish flu, he returned to the US, took an accounting course, and became an oil executive. In 1932, he was fired for his drinking and began to do what he wanted, write. He wrote for the pulp magazines such as Black Mask as a way of learning to write and getting paid for it. Hollywood came to Chandler. He was nominated for his first script for an Oscar, Double Indemnity, starring Fred McMurray and Barbara Stanwyck. He also wrote scripts for Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train and the noir classic The Blue Dahlia. Interestingly, his private life resembled a Pym narrative. His mother was quite dominating, and he lived with her until he was 36. They married the mother of a school friend, 17 years his senior. It was a happy marriage, despite her chronic health problems, despite her unsuitability, and he fell apart after her death. Binge drinking and suicidal, he moved back to England, where he died in 1959. Conversely, Pym's genealogy features a Chandler-esque mystery. Her father's parents were not who he thought they were. His father's sister was actually his mother, seduced or raped while working as a housemaid in a large mansion. He never revealed this secret to his children, nor was it discovered before Pym's death, although we can speculate that her legacy of family secrets may have spurred her intense curiosity to know. For Barbara, Pym was ravenously inquisitive. She played detective, stalking her crushes as her heroine Dulcie does in No Fond Return of Love, and creating sagas, imaginary biographies of strangers glimpsed in passing. Pym's biographer and friend, Hazel Holt, describes how Barbara and her sister, Hilary, like Harriet and Belinda in Some Tame Gazelle, liked to sit by the window from which they could observe the comings and goings of the road beneath. Pym contended that to those who have never invented and maintained a saga, the whole thing must have seemed very strange indeed. The subject can be anyone at all, but it is most rewarding to weave a saga around someone you can actually observe. Indeed, some officiants at a nearby church who were spied upon by the Pym sisters and even furtively tailed by car became the characters Wilt Basin, Keith, and Bill Coleman in A Glass of Blessings. Even Bill Coleman's reliable husky originated in this saga. No small wonder that the collection of Pym's letters and diaries was titled, punningly, A Very Private Eye. Her favorite place to watch human behavior was a restaurant, writes Holt. For there she could sit quietly in the background while people interacted with food. Each glimpse of the intimate relationship between the person and the plate cried out to her. Cafeterias, tea shops, cafes, pubs, dining cars, a park at noon, anywhere people were eating was fertile ground. Here is an example of such an observation from Pym's diary, circa 1964. Notice the efficiency of this description of a coworker. Mr. Clayton in the library. He is having his lunch, eating a sandwich with a knife and fork, a glass of milk near at hand. She ends this passage with a cri de coeur. Oh, why can't I write about things like that anymore? Why is this kind of thing no longer acceptable? What is wrong with being obsessed with trivia? What are the minds of my critics filled with? What nobler and more worthwhile things? Let us compare two moments of intense observation. These moments open an unsuitable attachment and the long goodbye. An unsuitable attachment begins with an act of mutual surveillance. They are watching me, thought Rupert Stonebird, as he saw the two women walking rather too slowly down the road. But no doubt I am watching them too, he decided. For as an anthropologist, he knew that men and women may observe each other as warily as wild animals hidden in the long grass. One day, he thought, we shall probably know each other, and for that reason, he turned away from the window, not feeling quite equal to meeting the unashamed curiosity of their glances as they came nearer. From this passage, we can predict Rupert's shy hesitations, his passivity, his poor timing, all of which run through subsequent encounters with Ianthe and Penelope. The two women who are observing him, sisters Sophia and Penelope, are ravenously curious in their own ways. Sophia dutifully wondering if he'll join her husband's congregation, Penelope speaking loudly and self-deprecatingly in hopes of attracting the man's notice. The themes of the novel are jump-started. And this is Chandler opening The Long Goodbye. The first time I laid eyes on Terry Lennox, he was drunk in a Rolls-Royce silver wraith outside the terrace of the dancers. The parking lot attendant had brought the car out and he was still holding the door open because Terry Lennox's left foot was still dangling outside as if he had forgotten he had one. He had a young-looking face, but his hair was bone white. You could tell by his eyes that he was plastered to the hairline. There was a girl beside him. Her hair was a lovely shade of dark red, and she had a distant smile on her lips, and over her shoulders she had a blue mink that almost made the Rolls-Royce look like just another automobile. It didn't quite. Nothing can. What do we notice? As in the passage from Pym, we find a private eye's fascination with people and the environments that define them. Lennox has one foot on the ground, like an actor in a Hollywood bedroom scene. He is half in, half out of the roles, and half in, half out of the jet-set life. He ends up on his keister on the blacktop, prefiguring the novel's plot. Could it be that these descriptions perform a writerly practice, allowing a scene to play out as characters reveal themselves? For both the novelists, it seems the real mysteries are other people. Let's consider Ianthe. Philip Larkin, in the introduction to An Unsuitable Attachment, found himself not caring very greatly for Ianthe. Her decency and good breeding are stated rather than shown. Ianthe, a former head girl, a canon's devoted daughter, is called a little inhuman by an acquaintance, a little too good to be true. Rupert Stonebird finds her aesthetically pleasing, like a piece of furniture or a vase. Seeing her, a vague idea formed in his mind, not that he loved her, but that he would like to see her always in his house, like some suitable decoration or finishing touch. Named after a love poem by the minor Victorian poet Walter Savage Landor, Ianthe possesses all the virtues of a Victorian lady. She is generous, honest, humble, helpful, dutiful, and always appropriately suitable. Until that is, she meets John Callow, a new hire at the library where she works. John is either a sincere lover or a conniving younger man. Everyone warns her against him. The jealous Rupert calls him an impostor. John, they say, wants her money, her furniture, her virtue. But in an act of near heroic courage, Ianthe chooses this young man as her husband. She opts for an attachment of the heart. She activates a belief in her own future. Others in the novel seem too attached to the past or too enmeshed in the present, bound by class and gender and unable to take the risk. They resent Ianthe's choice. As Sophia, clearly a mother stand-in, tactlessly comments, Ianthe seems to me to be somehow destined not to marry, almost as if Ianthe were biologically determined to be eternally suitable and isolated, an island unto herself. But there's an irony here. Even Sophia, who loves her cat, Faustina, more than her husband, is stultified by the suitable role she plays. She is wishing upon Ianthe a similar sterility. Critics may, rather conventionally, celebrate Pym as a champion of the non-special, the unheroic, the humble, the steady, the meek. But Ianthe, Sophia, and Penelope, who certainly fit these non-un categories, wish to be more than helpmeets, typing up hubby's manuscripts, keeping house, making endless cups of tea. Pym offers other life models in the characters of Sophia's aunt, living happily in Italy, and the common spinster, Miss Grimes, who surprises Ianthe by self-sufficiency. But she also reveals her own hesitations about feminism. Prudence, reader of women's magazines, is ribbed for her attempts at swinging 60s fashion. Her eyeliner smears her metallic mini dress, splits its seams. Her bouffant goes sideways, and she comforts herself with chocolate bars found among the sofa cushions. It is only after the disappointment of her relations with Rupert, when she lowers her expectations, dresses more modestly, more drably, that she is rewarded by, surprise, Rupert's attentions. Pym, that very private eye, ties up the plot's loose ends, but she leaves larger questions unanswered. As Rupert plots his pursuit of Penny, echoing the opening metaphor of animals stalking each other, do we really believe that they are well suited? All signs point to no, and yet, does it matter? Readers recognize the gesture towards a happy ending, and like most of the characters, we accept what's offered, some kind of attachment. Penelope's happiness is similarly gestured toward, but whether she will choose the reticent Rupert or some version of happy singleness is unknown. The possibilities of different unions, Sophia with her cat, Mervyn with his mother, Harriet with her pet cleric, Basil, the Pettigrew brother and sister team, exemplify other satisfyingly or unsatisfyingly unsuitable attachments. In The Long Goodbye, we find another kind of unsuitable attachment, and a femme fatale version of Ianthe. Eileen Wade is a lady, a rarity in Chandler's Hollywood, and described as a princess from an Arthurian romance. She was slim and quite tall in a white linen tailor-made with a black and white polka dot scarf around her throat. Her hair was the pale gold of a fairy princess. There was a small hat on it into which the pale gold hair nestled like a bird in its nest. Her eyes were cornflower blue, a rare color, and the lashes were long and almost too pale. She reached the table across the way and was pulling off a white gauntleted glove, and the old waiter had the table pulled out in a way no waiter will ever pull a table out for me. She sat down and slipped the gloves under the strap of her bag and thanked him with a smile so gentle, so exquisitely pure, that he was damn near paralyzed by it. She was unclassifiable, as remote and clear as mountain water, as elusive as its color. Eileen is a gracious hostess, a selfless support to her husband, Roger Wade, the alcoholic writer of popular sword and sandal novels, and a vengeful murderess. The love of her life, a wartime romance, has betrayed her, and she wreaks a bloody revenge. Her seeming suitability disguises boundless rage. If, as most readers agree, Roger Wade is a stand-in for Chandler himself, a man who despises himself as a hack writer, Eileen is the woman he idealizes. Perhaps fittingly, it is Eileen who kills the hack writer, and it is Philip Marlowe who catches her, teasing out the threads of her crimes, linking her to Terry Lennox, and who allows her the respectable punishment of suicide rather than turning her into the authorities. The Long Goodbye began as a novel, a breaking away from expectations. But without Philip Marlowe, Chandler soon found himself out of steam, out of sorts, and out of funds. He reintroduced Marlowe to the narrative, and everything began to move forward, to pop with energy. But the two threads of plot, the man, Terry Lennox, who everyone thinks is dead, but who isn't dead, and the man who hires Marlowe to keep him from killing his beautiful wife, never quite align. Readers may find the mystery as oddly akimbo as a bad renovation, the new sitting uneasily upon the old. Part of this may be what Chandler himself defined in a letter to his London publisher, Hamish Hamilton. I am afraid Mr. Marlowe has developed far more than a suspicion that a man of his parts is beginning to look pretty ridiculous as a small-time private detective. He is getting self-conscious, trying to live up to his reputation among the intellectuals. It is the intellectuals who now champion Raymond Chandler and Barbara Pym's novels, who, working within and transforming the boundaries of their respective genres, created literary styles deemed Pymian and Chandler-esque. As my Venn diagram fills, I would like to end with a more generalized assessment of an unsuitable attachment. As we all know, it was rejected by Pym's publishers in 1963 as being unsuitable for the times, and was only published in 1982, 2 years after her death. Many have decried the injustice of this, but Pym herself, though hurt, did not seem to think this novel one of her best efforts. She never attempted to revise it or tried another press. Perhaps she agreed with Philip Larkin's assessment when he found that there was a certain familiarity about some of the characters. What this adds up to is perhaps a sense of coasting. What must have been more galling was that her other books continued to sell and were even adapted by the BBC, even as her new work remained unpublished for 14 years. Chandler, too, struggled against the rigid requirements of editors. As I look back on my stories, it would be absurd if I did not wish they had been better. But if they had been much better, they would not have been published. If the formula had been a little less rigid, more of the writing of that time might have survived. It is sad to consider the many novels that went unwritten. I would like to leave the last words to Barbara Pym. If there's one thing that makes my Venn diagram viable, it is the way that she and Chandler both fulfill the requirements of a recognizable style, which was one of Pym's self-professed ambitions. In a radio talk she gave in 1978, she said, "One of my favorite quiz games on television some years ago was that one in which panelists were asked to guess the authorship of certain passages which were read out to them, and then to discuss various features of the author in question. There were no prizes for guessing, no moving belt of desirable objects passing before their eyes, just the pleasure and satisfaction of recognizing the unmistakable voice of Henry James or Henry Green or whoever it might be. I think that's the kind of immortality most authors would want, to feel that their work would be immediately recognizable as having been written by them and by nobody else. But of course, it's a lot to ask for." Like Chandler, Pym considered the ways that subtleties of class, race, and sexual orientation influence behavior and influence outcomes. That is, the tropes of happy endings. The acuity and efficiency of their observations convey the private eye's voyeuristic fascination while sketching anthropological clan systems or LA class systems with slyly humorous exaggerations. To paraphrase critic James Meek, Pym and Chandler both see through the material to the true meaninglessness of it all. They are both part of that small band of writers who have created a self-contained world within which their characters move freely. This they achieve through their own personal, idiosyncratic view of life, expressed in a unique style. And that is asking a lot. Finally, I'd like to end with one more image. I was watching the BBC Mystery Endeavour when I heard of a little village that they were going to visit called Crampton Hotnet. And here is a photograph I took from the television of the map showing where Crampton Hotnet, it does exist. So a little joke. Um, thank you so much. I look forward to questions and discussions at our later meeting. And again, I'm quite honored to be a part of this.